Well, it's time now for perspective, and we're returning to one of the day's top stories, those twin suicide attacks in Tunisia that left one police officer dead and another injured. A number of civilians were also hurt in those blasts. That news, of course, coinciding with an official announcement that Tunisian President Beji Caid Essebsi is in hospital after suffering a severe health crisis. Well, we can cross now to London to speak with Max Gallien, who's a political scientist specialised in the politics and economics of the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24. Now, these attacks have been claimed by the Islamic State group. It would seem the group does still have the capacity to carry out appalling attacks like this, despite losing the vast majority of their territory in Iraq and Syria.
Good morning. Yes, the attacks have been claimed by the Islamic State, even though I think it's important to be careful with kind of any further analysis on the attackers themselves. They remain capable of carrying out these types of attacks. However, I think it's also important to put that in the context of what has been a relatively quiet year in Tunisia and across its both kind of capital and interior regions. There's been a smaller third attack yesterday that hasn't been claimed by anybody yet. But I do think it's important to point out that it's been, apart from these attacks, a relatively quiet year.
But these attacks do come at the height of the country's tourism season, also months before a very closely watched election. This timing is surely significant.
It is surely unfortunate. It's surely something that will put the country on alert. I don't think the timing in any way is coordinated with the health of the president, as that happened after the attacks. But it surely comes at the height, as you said, of the tourism season. What is important to point out here is that contrary to attacks on Sousse or the Bardo Museum in the past, these attacks have not been aimed at tourists themselves. Both attacks seem to be quite clearly aimed at institutions of the state, and particularly security services.
So what then would you assume are the main objectives of whoever it is that is carrying out these attacks?
I mean, I wouldn't want to speculate on the attackers, but it does fit into a wider pattern of altercations between members of the Islamic State and other terrorist groups in the region, and in particular the Tunisian state and the Tunisian security services. This is also something we've seen more in the Algerian border region in the west of the country. So there's really, I think, the pattern that we're seeing in the last couple of years, rather than larger attacks against tourism infrastructure. That is not to say that this is not a severe threat for the country's tourist industry, which is incredibly important to the country's economy and a really crucial source of foreign currency. However, I do think it's important to see that this is a different pattern than we've seen in the last kind of more high-profile range of attacks in the past.
And how exactly is the government trying to tackle these sorts of attacks? Is the government having any success, for that matter?
So we've seen in the last couple of years a very intense effort, both by the Tunisian government, but also by its international partners, to improve Tunisian security infrastructure. I think especially the lessons of the Sousse attacks have been taken very seriously. We've seen the Tunisian government in collaboration with, in this case, the German and the Americans, dramatically increase its security infrastructure at its borders, but also internally. Now, that being said, I think many countries, not just in North Africa, but also across Europe, have learned in the last couple of years that it is very difficult to completely eliminate the possibility of these types of attacks. But I think the topic's certainly been taken very seriously by Tunisia.
And of course, Tunisia is located in a volatile region, neighbouring Libya, which is something of a failed state. We have, of course, Algeria nearby, also a known hotbed for extremism. Is this something that's feeding in to what we're currently seeing in Tunisia, possibly?
This is something that historically always been a difficult situation for the country, and certainly dealing with the crisis in Libya has been an incredible challenge for Tunisia, which shares a very large border with Libya that has been quite difficult to control in the past. That being said, I don't want to speculate on the exact biography of the attackers of yesterday. We've certainly in the past seen perpetrators of past attacks in Tunisia being trained in camps in Libya, being connected to groups in Libya. But we've also seen people who have been radicalized domestically. So I don't want to speculate exactly what happened yesterday. But it is important to point out that the crisis in Libya has been an incredibly difficult situation for a young post-revolutionary state in Tunisia to manage.
Now, Essebsi is the world's oldest sitting president. If he doesn't come back from this latest bout of ill health, or if he's unable to resume his duties, will elections currently scheduled for November be brought forward, do you think? What are we likely to see there?
So that has been the big discussion yesterday. There are constitutional provisions for this case, but the question exactly is what the health of the president is, whether he, for example, would be able to abdicate himself and transfer responsibilities to his prime minister, Youssef Chahed, or if he would be incapacitated or even pass away and would not be able to do that himself. The issue here is that the Constitution sees a role for the Constitutional Court to, in a sense, delegate the president's, to meet and then delegate the president's responsibilities, either depending on the health of the president to the Prime Minister Youssef Chahed or to the head of Parliament, Mohamed al-Nasser. The issue here is that due to disagreements politically about the nominations for the court, Tunisia does not currently have the Constitutional Court. So it finds itself in a somewhat difficult position. However, I do hope and I'm confident that this is something that could be resolved. And depending on the health of the president, we might see presidential elections somewhat earlier than expected.
Max Gallien, a political scientist specialising in the politics and economics of the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24.